Our gospel comes from John chapter 21. When they had finished breakfast, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my lambs." A second time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He said to him, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Tend my sheep." He said to him a third time, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter felt hurt because he said to him a third time, "Do you love me?" And he said to him, "Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you." Jesus said to him, "Feed my sheep. Very truly, I tell you, when you were younger, you used to fasten your own belt and go wherever you wished. But when you grow old, you will stretch out your hands, and someone else will fasten a belt around you and take you where you do not wish to go." He said this to indicate the kind of death by which Peter would glorify God. After this, Jesus said to him, "Follow me." The gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Christ. You may be seated. Follow me. Being someone who follows Jesus is a very unique invitation. And I love this story today because in it we hear three aspects of what it means to follow Jesus. As I mentioned in the children's sermon, we cannot forget that this story of Peter involves the night in the garden when Jesus was arrested and Peter followed in the courtyard of the high priest. And when the time came for him to speak of his relationship with Jesus as a follower, as a disciple, he denied it 3 times. And many people have showed how this question that Jesus asks after Easter, 3 times asking Peter, "Do you love me?" that it's a mirroring of the story. It's almost as if Jesus is offering Peter a way to make up for that denial. Now, I don't think that Jesus needs that. I think the forgiveness was already there for Peter. But I think sometimes you and I, as humans, we need rituals. We need to sort of go through these processes to feel a sense that it's real. And so 3 times Peter gets the opportunity to say, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." One of the things that I think is so key and foundational to us being Christians is simply that relationship that we're offered through Jesus. That assurance that there is nothing that we can do or not do that is going to sever that relationship. In fact, we can have incredible doubts and flat out stop believing for periods of time. We can run from the church and do all sorts of things, but yet when we return, over and over again, we see through the person of Jesus that Jesus and God remain there waiting for us, ready to receive back, ready for reconciliation and forgiveness. And what that reality reminds us is that our worth as a human being isn't dependent on what we've done or not done, but rather what's been done for us. That we are valuable because we are children of God. And we are children of God because of what Jesus has done. And so the foundation of our understanding as being followers of Jesus is that identity that we cannot ruin, that is a gift. And then this invitation, if you notice, what does Jesus say every time Peter confesses, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you"? Jesus responds with this fascinating phrase, "Feed my sheep, tend my lambs, feed my sheep." Obviously, it's a metaphor. But if we think about what lambs are, they're vulnerable, and they need direction, and they need guidance, and they need protection. Part of our call as Christians is to be like the shepherd that Jesus was, and to go into the world no matter how old we are and no matter what our gifts are. There will be a realm in which we operate where there are people who need protection and guidance and direction. For many of us, honestly, this starts at home. It starts with our spouses. It starts with our family, our children. It starts with our friends. That tending them and caring for them, giving guidance and protection, is one of the core pieces of work that we have. Martin Luther often said that this is where our entire life as Christians begin, is at home. But then it moves out. It moves out to the other realms, that where we work and at school and at church and in the places we operate, that job doesn't go away, that as Christians we are called to continue with that care and that loving presence. And it even extends out to the stranger and even our enemies, and to the person halfway across the world. We are called to be a shepherd. And yet I find this fascinating because even as we are called, this involves a sense of humility, because we may not always know what's best for other people. We can't assume that we know. A week ago, I was in the cities with my family, and my sister's very passionate about the nonprofit organization called Feed My Starving Children. I don't know if any of you have heard of this, but we went to a packing event together as a family. And so you go to the center and you work as a team and you put together these little individual packets that have rice and vegetables and nutrients, and these get sent off. And that particular day, we knew that food was going to Haiti. And what I like about this story is the founder of Feed My Starving Children had been on a mission trip years ago. And he'd gone to, I believe it was actually Haiti. And he saw all of these children whose parents were so poor that they couldn't afford to feed them. I mean, one meal a day would have been a good deal for those families. And he was so affected by this that he went back to the United States and he started collecting power bars and all of these highly nutritious pieces of food. And he was sending them down there and really trying to make a difference, only to find out later that the food he was sending was making the kids more sick, because they weren't used to highly processed food like we are in America. The food was too much for their little bodies, and it wasn't actually doing them any good. But he still felt this call to feed my sheep. And so what he did was he actually listened to what the people really needed. He got together with some nutritionists and other people who worked in the nonprofit sphere and came up with very simple food: rice, vegetables, soy. Something that was so mild and yet so nutritious that kids, even in the worst state of malnutrition, would be able to eat and digest this food. I think it's a beautiful illustration of how we're called in our own unique ways, in little and big ways, to go out and help. But yet listening and having a sense of humility and not just assuming we know the way it's supposed to be is so key. I also want us to think about the fact that sometimes we're actually not the shepherd. Sometimes we're the sheep. Sometimes we still need guidance, and sometimes we need protection and help. It's fascinating because I think this is actually harder for us as Christians to do than to try to be a shepherd, because it involves admitting that we can be vulnerable, that we need help. Oftentimes I talk to people who don't want to go to church when life is really hard, or maybe they have some sort of physical disability and they don't want people to see them in church in a wheelchair or in crutches or something. And I don't know where we get this idea that as Christians we have to have it all together. But this can be the hardest thing for us, can't it? To allow other people to care for us, or to allow other people to guide and correct us. It's really hard because it becomes a matter of our pride and our ego. And this leads me to the third part. There's sort of this odd sentence in the gospel lesson where Jesus talks about, fastening your belt, and how Peter is going to have to be led where he doesn't want to go. Well, if some of you know the story of Peter, not actually in the Bible, but the traditional story is that when Peter was in Rome many years later, he was arrested, and when he was going to be executed, they were going to crucify him. And he actually said that he didn't feel he was worthy to die in the same manner that Jesus died. And so they crucified him upside down. That's the story. Being a Christian is going to at some point involve sacrifice, and Jesus wanted Peter to know that right away. We read this really neat Acts story where Peter's actually saved at one point, and so sometimes we can get this idea in our mind that if bad things happen, if the community just prays hard enough, that everything will turn out just right and bad things won't happen. Well, we don't know why sometimes good things happen and sometimes bad things happen. But in this gospel story, Jesus almost promises that if you're a follower of Jesus, there's going to involve some kind of letting go, where you won't be in control anymore. Now, I can guarantee that most of us in this room will probably not be arrested for our faith, will probably not die for our faith. In fact, I think what we're called to sacrifice may be far more subtle, but just as important. As I reflect on my adult life as a pastor and as a mother and as a friend and as a wife, that's the other thing I am. One of the things I'm called to sacrifice is my need to have people approve of me. That as I am learning who I am in Jesus as a pastor, that what's most important is that I follow who God wants me to be. And that sometimes that comes in conflict with what other people think I should be. And so letting go of that need to be accepted and understood, of caring what people think, quite honestly. What an odd sacrifice, and yet there's that call. The call to want to be perfect. The call to want to do things just right. But another thing that I think we're continually called to is that we can hold on to things in life, expectations of how things should go. Those of you who've been married for longer than a year know that the person you marry actually starts to change a little bit. And oftentimes we can hold on to this idea of who the person we married was supposed to be and what marriage is supposed to look like. And if we just try to hold on to those ideas too hard, we can actually cause a lot of suffering in that relationship. That part of that is learning to let go and learning how to care and shepherd for one another. And this is true with kids too, isn't it? Because kids are never completely who we expect them to be, and they are their own people. And sometimes if we try to hold on to the way it should be, we can cause a lot of unnecessary suffering. This can be true in our church communities where we have an idea of the way things should be, and we can hold on so tightly and fight, and we know that we're right. And yet I think even our need to be right needs to be let go of as well. I think we see this in God, that God thought relationship was more important than being right. Over and over again, we see in the person of Jesus that Jesus sacrifices being right in favor of the relationship, in favor of grace. This is an amazing journey that we go on together. The call to follow Jesus is an amazing invitation. That we are called children of God out of pure gift and love and grace that never ends. And then we're turned around to go out to care for and be cared for. And in learning and doing both, we sacrifice and are called to let go of our ego and our pride, our need to be right, so that God can step in and do new things in our life and in the lives of those around us in the world. It is a humble service to which we are called, following in the footsteps of Jesus. Amen.